I do believe they set the expectation bar too high in advance of today's budget. You shouldn't talk about something as transformational if you're not able to kind of deliver on it.
Well, it has been a day or two since the budget's been released, and it seems to not have impressed really anybody. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today, as well as another story that I wanted to cover a few days ago, but I figured let me give it some time, see what the response is from the Liberal government, see what transpires. I finally got my answer, so that's also what we're going to be tackling first before the budget. So without further ado, if you guys could, like, comment, and subscribe. And now let's dive into the news. Now, as I mentioned, I wanted to cover this story a few days ago when it first broke, as many other people did. But I also wanted to give it a bit of time because when Pierre Poilievre was on Rosie Barton's show, she asked him this question about the Supreme Court overturning a ruling in regards to two individuals who had a lot of child imagery and were spreading it. Now, the court ruled that the minimum sentence of a year could potentially affect their Charter of Rights, Section 12, which is cruel and unusual punishment, which Pierre Poilievre was very vocal about, saying that this wasn't enough.
Well, first of all, the accused and convicted offenders are appalling, frankly. These are two men who had possession of literally hundreds of images and videos of children. One of them had 377 images of children between 3 and 6 years old. Another had hundreds of videos of children between 5 and 10. They created demand for material that was made by torturing, humiliating, and defiling innocent children who will never recover from it for the rest of their lives. And frankly, they were originally given 1-year sentences. That was appealed. It should have been way more than 1-year sentence. There should be a mandatory minimum of more, probably 5 or even 10 years. So this ruling is wrong-headed, and I would oppose the ruling, and I would use the notwithstanding clause to overturn it. And my future government will introduce mandatory prison sentences for possession of child pornography, so that dirtbags like this go away for a very long time.
Some of the reasoning from the justices was that they could see a scenario where two 18-year-olds exchange images and then have a mandatory minimum imposed on them. I don't know what you make of that.
Now, what Rosie mentioned there at the end is actually something that the courts put forward, saying that if there was two 18-year-olds and one of them had a 17-year-old girlfriend and shared an image of her with the other 18-year-old, technically they would be sharing child imagery because anyone under 17 is considered a child. Now, that gets a little bit muddied in my opinion because you have the government trying to label mature minors as anyone who's over 12 and can consent to things like maid, but apparently sharing an image of them when they're 17 to an 18-year-old, that's still considered child imagery. But I digress. As Pierre mentioned, that's not the scenario at hand. These are two individuals who had hundreds of images of children from 3 to 6 and then videos from 5 to 10. That is disgusting. I have children that age, and I'm fully on board with what Pierre was saying. Now, he wasn't the only one. Doug Ford also came out saying that he wanted Carney to use the notwithstanding clause. Danielle Smith also put it forward. And so a lot of conservative premiers, the leader of the opposition, were very vocal about it. And it wasn't just the conservatives. Wab Kinew of the NDP also came out, and he said that they should basically be buried under the jail.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew is joining other premiers in denouncing a Supreme Court of Canada ruling on child pornography, and he's pulling no punches.
Child sexual abuse images and video, this is like one of the worst things that anyone can do. Not only should go to prison for a long time, they should bury you under the prison. You shouldn't get protective custody. They should put you into general population, if you know what I mean.
The High Court last week ruled 1-year mandatory minimum jail sentences for accessing or possessing child pornography are unconstitutional. Conservative politicians all across Canada have demanded Ottawa overrule the decision with the notwithstanding clause. Kinew says he agrees.
I think the average person out there hears an announcement like this and just kind of shakes their head. And this is why our Bill 50 was brought into place, so that, yeah, we can protect people's rights in Manitoba, but there's still the ability for a legislature or parliament to take action when you hear something like this. It just doesn't make sense to the average person.
Now, as I mentioned, I didn't touch this for a few days because I wanted to see if the government would actually be questioned on this or even address it. Because nobody had posted anything on this on their Twitters, like Sean Fraser or Mark Carney. However, 2 days ago, Sean Fraser was questioned about this in the hallways of Parliament, and this was what he had to say.
Of the Supreme Court of Canada striking down the one-year mandatory minimum for possession of child pornography, and are you looking at using the notwithstanding clause to reinstate that mandatory minimum?
So let me just start by saying, not just as an MP or a minister, but as a parent, sexual crimes committed against kids are amongst the most despicable that exist within our society. We just put legislation on the table that can deal with consecutive sentencing for such crimes, and that would prohibit courts from ordering house arrest for sexual crimes committed against kids. Over the next number of weeks, we are putting together another piece of legislation that's going to take further action to deal with sexual exploitation of kids in an online environment, and we're looking at harsher penalties right now. The path forward will involve certain policy choices. I don't necessarily think we need to override the Constitution to fix these problems, but we are going to fix the gap.
But is the notwithstanding clause still an option on the table?
We don't intend to override the Constitution to fix the problem. There's other solutions that are apparent to us, and we're doing the policy exercise to find the right path right now to protect our kids.
Now, Sean Fraser is going on about how he's a father, how he wants to protect children, but then it sounds like that they're more interested in protecting the Charter rights and freedoms of the individuals who are doing this to the children, rather than trying to just overturn this so that children are safe. Because he says we're proposing legislation, or we're going to be proposing something. How long is that going to take between now and then? How much more damage can be done? Instead of just using the notwithstanding clause to overturn this so that there is harsher penalties to these individuals who are committing these types of crimes. Now, yesterday in the House of Commons, Pierre Poilievre actually brought this towards Mark Carney, and this is what he had to say.
But on another subject, unfortunately a much darker subject, last week the Supreme Court ruled that a 1-year prison sentence was too much for possession of child abuse and exploitation materials. That sentence was already far too low for the two dirtbags who had literally hundreds of impressions and videos of children being tortured. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing, invoke the notwithstanding clause in order to put the rights of children ahead of the rights of those who abuse them?
Here, here, here.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I join all members of this House in condemning the exploitation of children as the most reprehensible sorts of crime. Mr. Speaker, that is why this government will be bringing forth legislation to combat these crimes, to penalize those who are responsible. That works within our Constitution.
So again, just more talk about this legislation that they're going to be creating and putting forward. No time frame really emphasized there. And so it seems like they are just not going to be using the notwithstanding clause. They are more concerned about people's charter rights and freedoms, even though during the Freedom Convoy, that didn't seem to be an issue, or the pandemic or anything like that. All of those moments, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms never really mattered. But now it matters when it's people perpetrating crimes against children. That blows my mind. Now, at this point, it's unfortunate that this is the stance that the government is taking. I'm going to be keeping an eye out on who else is in favor of this notwithstanding clause in regards to this situation. Maybe the government will get enough pressure that they will reverse course. Highly doubt it, but that's kind of where we are at this point with that story. But as we pivot back to the budget topic, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Liberals don't seem to be learning, because they're talking about all these cuts, how we need to tighten our belts, savings, austerity, this, and that. Yet they are going and having parties the day of the budget release and drinking Prosecco and champagne and all this kind of stuff. Stuart Benson, who, if you remember, during the election, there was a whole issue with Rebel News taking up space for questions, and they were arguing with another reporter or journalist from the Hill Times. That's this gentleman here. He posted this saying, hundreds of politicos, journalists, and libatious liberals joined Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne for the post-budget victory lap at Metro Brasserie, Prudence and Prosecco Shindig. And yeah, this is an annual thing that they do, but when the budget is as big as it is, or the deficit is as big as it is, and their debt and all that stuff, you would think maybe they wouldn't do annual traditions, right? But when we start to look at some of these photos, you have Carney and Francois, but right here, this is Susan Smith. And if you know anything about her, she is part of the Blue Sky Strategy Group. She's usually on CPAC as one of the liberal pundits. And there's a lot of other familiar faces. Right here, looking at François-Philippe Champagne, this is Muhammad Ali. He works at Crestview Strategy. He's also another liberal pundit that's usually on CTV or anything like that. This is a group from Earnscliffe, Canada. They're just members of it. And another individual who works at Earnscliffe is this individual, Melanie, who I'm sure you've seen plenty of times on CBC with David Cochrane. She's usually a panelist for the NDP. And here we also see more NDP individuals. You have Brad Levine, who is also another NDP pundit. You have Anne McGrath, who was the campaign spokesperson for the NDP for Jagmeet Singh. She was at this event as well. As I mentioned, Brad Levine, he is usually on CBC, Power and Politics with David Cochrane as the NDP individual. So very interesting how we have these kind of groups mending and blending together at this little shindig. Now, a lot of the comments were, who pays for this event? And Stewart said it was paid by Earnscliffe and Politico. No taxpayer funds were used for this party. Well, that wasn't completely true because Mr. Brandt, he said, it's all taxpayer funds. You're all taxpayer funded. And when we look at Politico, they get taxpayer money here. Earnscliffe Strategy Group also gets money here. Another individual from Politico that we just covered was this lady, Mickey Druick. She's the one who broke the story on Chris D'Entremont switching over to the liberal side. She was the one who got the exclusive, I guess, and wrote the article on Politico. And you also have this account, Cooper here, saying a real journalist would take 2 minutes like I just did to see that Earnscliffe Strategy has received more than $12.6 million in contracts from the Liberal government since 2015. Politico has gotten $2.4 million. Taxpayers paid for this shindig. All journalists who attended are compromised. And when you go in here, you can see all the different amounts. They've had over 27 results just for Earnscliffe. So the government is just parting off of the teat of us taxpayers. Even though Stewart here says that they're not, it wasn't. But clearly, if you do a little bit of digging, that's a different story. But like I stated, there's not a lot of people who are actually feeling this budget. And even somebody like Scott Reed, who is a very prominent liberal pundit, also didn't really feel anything very conclusive about this budget. Take a listen to him on Vashi's panel yesterday.
I did want to get each of your takes, your read on the budget. We're a day after right now. It was billed as something generational, transformative, a sea change. Corey, did it deliver?
I don't think it was, this huge transformational budget. Like, it didn't feel like that to me. But then again, I'm not an economist. I'm a political hack. So maybe these changes are going to spur huge amounts of investment, and we'll all be shocked and surprised. I didn't find it was a terribly political budget, like in terms of the communication of it. And I don't know if you were to ask, even today or a few days from now, if anyone in Canada will have the first clue of what was in the budget and what it was all about, other than perhaps the deficit number. So I don't think it really punched through. And I think, the topic that we were just talking about, a floor crosser happening on budget day, was stepped on the budget message big time. And I wouldn't, I'm sure the Liberal caucus welcomes having another member, but I would sure not have preferred to have it on that day if I were them.
We spoke so many times in the lead up to the budget about sort of a somewhat convoluted narrative heading into it. Do you think the narrative was better defined or at all defined coming out, now that we actually have the document coming out of it, Scott?
I thought it was better defined on budget day. But there's still a big challenge. I mean, first of all, there was a hype man dimension to the pre-budget communications. It's going to be generational. This is a hinge moment. Oh my God, think about World War II type developments. So they excited people to the point where anything short of Krypton exploding was going to be a bit of a letdown. So I think that was a challenge. Then beyond that, I think when you look at this budget in terms of its actual measures, you can tell that the Prime Minister used to be a central bank governor, because when you look at it, it seeks to re-engineer, restructure the economy of Canada in response to legitimate concerns and pressures. The absence of the United States is that reliable partner that generates wealth and prosperity and jobs. So you want to restructure it. The challenge is that those measures, first of all, we don't know if they'll work. Second of all, if they do work, they take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And of course, the political calendar operates at a different level. So, I mean, are there people at the local bus stop saying, you know what, I think it's important that they had all those impressive productivity and competitiveness measures, because I believe that that's going to spur investment in machinery over the course of the next 6 years, which will generate investment and attract investment by the time that my children are graduating from high school. That's the challenge. They've got to make this thing urgent, real, and street level for people in the post-budget sale.
I mean, who doesn't talk about productivity at the dinner table? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's just so macro. Anyway.
Now, I'm no real fan of Scott Reid, but I did find that pretty funny. The fact that he was mocking Mark Carney, talking about productivity and competitiveness all the time. It's kind of ridiculous. But somebody I don't like listening to even more would be Sean Fraser. And unfortunately, he got onto Vashti's show where she just grilled him saying, listen, there are institutions here that say this budget is not good at all. It's not what you even say it is. They're not going to be changing any sort of forecast because of how poor this is. And he tries to defend it by saying, we're doing this, we're doing that. And she throws it back at him saying, like, you were in the previous government where you had the opportunity to do that and you never did. So what makes you think we should believe you now?
And look at all the other things you're announcing that you say will have a material impact, really, I guess, 5 years out or more on Canadians' lives. Don't take my word for it. I look at the analysis from Desjardins, which said if Canadians were hoping for a transformative or generational budget, they will be disappointed with the Government of Canada's budget 2025. The Bank of Montreal, much of the stimulus in the budget consists of measures that were already known, so it is unlikely to cause a sharp revision of economic growth forecasts. The pitch from your government is what we're doing here is so unique, you are going to see the economy grow in ways that you haven't before. The Bank of Montreal is saying we're not even going to revise our forecast based on what we saw in this budget.
Well, you look at some of the examples of the game-changing policies that are in the budget, and they may have been announced a month ago, but still form part of the strategy going forward. Take, for example, the new approach to home building. Certainly, I was involved previously with policies designed to help build more homes, but the creation of a federal agency through Build Canada Homes to ensure that the government is able to act essentially as a developer, leveraging all of its tools at once, backed by a $13 billion capital investment, is a different way of doing things that I think is going to have a positive impact, not only on housing outcomes, but on productivity that's going to drive change within the sector, embracing more manufactured homes. It's this kind of different thinking that allows us to take control of the economy here in Canada in a way that people did not feel was under control over the last few years, particularly coming out of the pandemic, that sets this budget apart from many other similar efforts or different policies that have been put forward in previous years.
But Minister, you were in charge of housing through those previous years. Why now should Canadians listening tonight trust that a new agency will do what you were unable to do?
Now, I'm going to save us all the headache of having to listen to him answer because he just rambles on to the point where Vashi says, okay, well, we're out of time. But it just seems like that's all they do is they talk, and they never actually do what's needed to be done. There's people coming out saying, well, this budget doesn't really talk about the sectors that need help, like the automotive sector. That is a huge factor right now where automotive, forestry, all of those sectors are getting demolished. And we had Carney just yesterday talking about how he hasn't even talked to Donald Trump since they were in Asia.
Can I ask you then, I guess, on conversations? What's the current state of, I guess, your communication with the U.S. president in terms of reviving trade talks?
We'll see. It's the talks are not yet revived. I last spoke to the U.S. president a few days ago in Asia.
So you really start to wonder how interested is he or the government in trying to help out Canadians. Because if he was really focused on that, he could be doing everything that he's trying to do with diversification, but also try to work on getting a deal with Donald Trump. But the fact that they're not talking, or he hasn't even reached out or anything like that, tends to lead me to believe otherwise. But with all that being said, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below. If you can, like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.